how broken is Fortnite on the Nintendo Switch 1? That's right, I booted up the Switch 1 again today for the first time in actually quite a while, and I wanted to play Fortnite on it because there's a new Simpsons season, and I just was really curious to see how it would perform because, as we know, as most of us know at least, Fortnite on the Switch 1 is just broken in so many ways. Now, I've made a bunch of videos on my main channel, Russ Vandy, about how broken this game actually is. Those are some of my best performing videos, and I thought it would be fun to just talk about this on the second channel, just kind of going unscripted and talk to you about my experience about how the Switch 1 version is holding up in this season specifically, because this season has some very interesting quirks about it that I definitely thought would be absolutely horrible on the Switch, and I was mostly right. So there's this new Simpsons season that just dropped, as I mentioned, and pretty much this whole season is cel shaded. The map is all cel shaded, and if you played Fortnite on the Switch 1 at all, you know that any of the cartoon characters, they're all like kind of messed up on the Switch 1. Pretty bad. Like the outlines for the eyes and just most body parts aren't there. The lines just aren't thick enough because, you know, there's black outlines because these are all cartoon characters. They just don't exist on the Switch properly. Like Morty. I played as Morty in the Switch 1 version just because he's the most in-depth, detailed cartoon character, and you can really see the flaws of the Switch version when you actually use Morty in the game. His eyes don't have any outlines. His mouth is practically non-existent. I guess when you step back and you kind of squint your eyes, he looks good enough. And when you're playing in the actual game, it's not horribly looking. Like, he's not horrible. You can still kind of tell that it doesn't look perfect, but it's mainly in the menus that, my goodness, he looks completely cursed. And there are just so many things that have reminded me at how bad this Switch 1 version is. Like, okay, for example, the menus in general are so slow. Loading up the game alone takes several minutes, which might not sound horrible, but when you're standing there, you're waiting for the game to load up, it just takes so long. Like, my guy, I actually thought that the game froze, so I restarted it, but it turns out no, it was just loading. It just took that long to load. Like, it takes a long time to load up, and then when it does load up, it's like chugging. The frame rate is super low while you're navigating these menus. You can't even properly scroll like in the item shop or in your own character selection or any of that. It just takes forever. It's possible, it just takes a long time. Or even when you're looking through your skins like in the menus, the character preview on the left side of the screen, it just has this like blue cube loading screen thing that it's not a deal breaker necessarily. Like, you can still play the game, but it is the slowest platform you can play it on by far, especially as someone who's been playing on the Switch 2 version a lot. A lot of these little things really are standing out to me. I actually kind of forgot how bad this game was on the Switch 1. And let me just remind you, I'm playing this on the Switch 1 hardware, not the Switch 2 hardware, because you actually can't play Fortnite Switch 1 version on the Switch 2. You have to use the Switch 2 version. It just doesn't allow you to play the Switch 1 version on the Switch 2. I tried it. I was even going to make a whole video on it if it worked, but it didn't work. So when you actually load into the game, it doesn't even load in your skin. I was like a default for the first 5 seconds. That's of course if you even make it to the lobby before you're on the battle bus before a match starts. Which, by the way, was a whole other thing. I couldn't get into a match when I first booted up the game, and I had no idea why. Everyone was just kind of waiting on me to figure out how to even join them online, but it said matchmaking wasn't working. I had like an error code. It turns out that this actually wasn't the game's fault. It was my own fault. I had like the clock changed. For some reason, my clock wasn't accurate. It wasn't synchronized to the internet or something like that. But anyways, I eventually got into a game, and as soon as I dropped, I was just, oh my goodness, I just was flying down. The frame rate was like 10 maybe. It was not appealing, let me just say that much. And that being said, like I was kind of talking about with the cel shading, characters look horrible when they're cel shaded. So when the whole map was cel shaded, that's what made me extremely curious about how this game was going to run, how it was going to perform, how it was going to look, if I could even see things. Because part of me thought like, okay, because it's cel shaded, it's going to be a lot easier to run. Maybe this will actually run much better than any other season of the game. But then I also thought maybe this cell shading, I mean, obviously it looks bad already, but maybe it's actually drawing more power from the console. Who knows? As soon as I was dropping, I realized just how bad this was going to be. And it reminded me at how bad the Switch 1 version of the game was anyways. As I was dropping in, you can see like the trees are all low poly models. They all look horribly textured. It did not look pretty to the eyes at all. And that made the game run even worse. When I actually got onto the ground and let it load in and everything, it got a little more stable. I don't think it ever reached like a solid 30 frames per second in a 10-second time frame. Like within 10 seconds, it was bound to just hitch and stutter. But aside from the frame rate, I mean, like, it was playable. I actually forgot how playable this version was. Like, yes, it doesn't look good, but I think that because of this art style and all the cell shaded stuff, it makes it a little bit easier to actually see what's happening, and it makes the Switch downgrades look less bad, if that makes sense. Like in a regular season of Fortnite on the PS5 or whatever, there's always blades of grass on the ground, and on the Switch 1, you could tell that the grass just wasn't there. Like you could tell these big graphical downgrades, but because this is all cell shaded and it's all much more flat, you could say, the downgrades didn't seem as noticeable or as big of a deal. At least I'll throw up the difference between the Switch 2 version and the Switch 1 version, and you can just kind of tell from there the big difference within the game. The Switch 1 is obviously missing a lot of like the detailed shadows. The lines aren't nearly as crisp and fine-tuned. The resolution, oh my goodness, the resolution is so low. But I think that's just the Switch in general. Like, I'm so used to the 4K footage or the 4K looking menus and all that on the Switch 2 that I just forgot how bad 1080p looks in comparison. Obviously, the Fortnite on Switch 1 isn't even running at 1080p. I don't even think it's running at 720p. And that makes a difference. That makes a big difference. There's people in the distance that you can't really see that well and all that stuff. I think the worst offender is the 30 frames per second, but it's hard for me to complain about that alone. It's the fact that it's unstable. Like, it's just not a consistent 30 frames per second. I used the Joy-Con to look around, and I gotta just say, using the dinky little Joy-Con ones is kind of nostalgic, and using the gyro on it is pretty good, actually. I almost recommend or prefer playing with the Joy-Con. Now again, everything is here. You can buy all the cosmetics, you can go around the whole city, and I think in comparison, like if I hadn't played the Simpsons season on my PS5 or Switch 2 before, I wouldn't have actually thought this was that bad, but it really does make a big difference on these other consoles. I'm going to do a how broken is it on the Switch 2 as well. It's obviously not going to be as broken as it is on the Switch 1, but there are still some quirks about the Switch 2 version, so stay tuned for that. And listen, I'm happy that it can still play on the Switch 1, and that if you don't have a Switch 2 or you haven't upgraded from a Switch 1, those people can still play the game, and really, like, it is playable. But the real question is, how long is it actually going to last? They keep innovating on Fortnite in general, and what's it going to take for this game to just stop working on the Switch? Like, what's it going to take? They just added these new sidekicks to the game, where these pets just kind of run around with you on the screen. Yeah, you know, it's just stuff like that. They are always adding things, always implementing new features and all that stuff. So yes, how far will this actually go? I thought for sure that we might stop seeing support for this game after the Switch 2 released. I guess I was kind of silly on my end. I think this probably has a couple years left, but I can't see it going past that. So let me know if you've experienced the season on the Switch 1 yet and what your thoughts are on it. Am I being too dramatic? Like, subscribe, do all that other stuff. Tell me if you like the Russ Vandy 2 style of this content, or if you'd prefer me to just do a full video on the main channel about something like this. Let me know in the comments. I'm very curious to know what you think. And of course, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.